Howdy folks, and welcome to another episode of Mingles with Jingles. I have some bad news this week. Well, it's bad news for me. It's potentially bad news for you as well, but it's very definitely bad news for me. Where do I start? Thursday last week, I had a shoulder of lamb in the freezer that I was going to cook Greek style with lemons and potatoes, and it was going to be great. And record it for the Home with the Gnome, my other channel. So Thursday afternoon I went down to the kitchen and turned on the oven to preheat it. And then I came back 20 minutes later to find the oven was off, which was strange. My first thought was that Rita had come downstairs to make herself a cup of coffee in the meantime, had noticed that the oven was on and nothing was in it, and naturally assumed, oh, somebody forgot to turn the oven off, and turned it off for me. But then I looked at the dials and they were still on, it's just that there was no power to the oven. So that wasn't good. That's when I noticed that nothing else in the kitchen was on. In fact, nothing in the whole downstairs of the house had power, including my two freezers. The one under the stairs in the hallway and the one in the kitchen. And just the day before, I'd been to the butcher's and spent an awful lot of money on food. Beginning to panic, I went to check the fuse box, and sure enough the fuses had tripped. Fair enough, so I reset the fuses, back into the kitchen, heard a loud click, and everything went off again. Back to the fuse box, the fuses had tripped again. Reset them, and then I'd barely replaced the fuse panel cover when the fuses tripped again. The bizarre thing was, it was only the downstairs power that was tripping out. Everything upstairs was fine. There was still power to, well, everything upstairs, my PC, Rita's PC, the PlayStation, the TV that the PlayStation was connected to. This was all fine. And the lights worked downstairs, just nothing that plugged into a power socket. Every time I plugged something in and powered it up, the fuses tripped. So the first thing that I needed to do was to make sure that all of the food in my freezers wasn't going to defrost. And since I still had power upstairs, I ran an extension cable from the upstairs hallway down into the kitchen and plugged my fridge freezer in. So that saved most of the food. But I still had no power to anything downstairs that wasn't being run from an extension cable from upstairs. So I needed an electrician, and I needed one now. I didn't need one the next day or the day after, and wow, it's really expensive to get an electrician out in an emergency. I managed to find the number of a service that guaranteed to get an electrician to you within 90 minutes. It cost £205, not far short of $300, just for the privilege of having an electrician turn up at that kind of short notice. And then, of course, I also had to pay him by the hour. It eventually came to £250, or about $350. And after an hour of poking around and trying to isolate the problem, the electrician discovered what the source of the problem was. It was the fuse panel. He told me exactly what the issue was, but I can't remember the exact wording that he used or the units that he used. For the sake of argument, let's say amps. The fuse panel was rated for, and again, I'm not entirely sure if these are the correct numbers, but let's say the fuse panel was rated for 50 amps. It shouldn't start tripping until it started pulling more than 50 amps of current. And it was tripping after 15. So clearly this fuse panel needs to be replaced. Unfortunately, he didn't have that type of fuse panel with him. So I just paid £250, nearly $350 for an electrician to come out in an emergency, and he hadn't actually fixed anything. The good news, if you can call it good news, is that this new fuse panel had been fitted when I had the kitchen remodeled less than 6 months ago, so everything was still under guarantee. And the electrician wrote a report detailing the nature of the incident that I could hand over to the electrician from the company that built the kitchen for me when I called them the next morning and said, "Oi, come round and fix your stuff." So the next morning I phoned up the people who built my kitchen. They're a company who supply the parts for a new kitchen, for example. They don't actually employ their own workers. Instead, they contract out to local builders. So I called them, reminded them that the kitchen that they'd had built for me was still under guarantee and it needed fixing. So they said, yep, absolutely, this is a priority, we'll have somebody around as soon as possible. A couple of hours went by, a few more hours went by, a few more hours went by. As it happened, I still had the number of the electrician that they'd contracted to sort out the wiring for the kitchen in the first place. So I gave him a call. He said, no, they haven't phoned me. So I left it with him. He was there within an hour. He'd contacted the builders. They'd said, oh, yeah, we meant to tell you about that. So he turned up with the correct replacement bits, and he replaced the fuse panel. Fantastic. We powered everything up. Everything was fine. And then I woke up the next morning, and everything in the kitchen had tripped. Brand new fuse panel, same problem. The thing is, the house that I live in is really, really old. It was built in the 1960s as a Royal Navy Marine quarter. And at this point, and I've been around everything downstairs, I've switched everything off, unplugged everything from the wall sockets, and I've gone around plugging everything in one at a time, just to see if something is causing that fuse panel to trip. And I can't isolate the problem at all. There's no rhyme nor reason to it. It doesn't matter what I plug in, what I don't plug in. Eventually the fuse panel starts tripping. And when it starts tripping, it trips almost immediately every time I reset it, regardless of what is or isn't plugged in. Honestly, at this point, I think it's just really old, shitty wiring throughout the whole house. And I think the whole thing is going to have to be replaced. And oh my God, this is going to be expensive. But it needs to be done, because I haven't been able to cook anything or wash any clothes since the whole thing happened. I've been living on takeaways, and that's expensive too. So Monday, the day this episode of Mingles with Jingles goes live, I'm phoning around electricians and getting somebody to come round and do a survey of the house and then give me a quote for whatever it's going to take to get this problem fixed. So in the coming days, I hope, because remember, I can only run the fridge freezer in the kitchen because that's running off an extension cable from the upstairs hallway. All of the food inside the freezer underneath the stairs has had to be thrown out because I can't run that freezer. So hopefully this week I'll have an electrician round to fix my electricity problem, which is almost certainly going to cause some kind of disruption to my video upload schedule, because when I had the kitchen remodeled and the wiring was done in there, I regularly had to switch everything off so the electrician could isolate all of the power and do electrician things. And if, as I suspect, most of the wiring in the house is going to have to be ripped out and replaced, I'm going to be going without electricity all throughout the house, not just downstairs, for probably quite some time. So expect some disruptions to my video upload schedule, including probably Wednesday. Not to do with anything electrical related, but because on Tuesday I'm helping a friend move house. That's probably going to take all day as well. Oh, what a time to be alive. God. Oh, this is going to cost a fortune, I know it. But it needs to be done, because I haven't been able to cook anything. I mean, all of the food in the freezer in the kitchen is fine, I just can't cook any of it. All of the food in the refrigerator in the kitchen is fine for the next few days, but because I can't cook any of it, that's all probably going to have to get thrown out as well. Oh God. Well, fingers crossed. I mean, it's going to be expensive, but this needs to get fixed sooner rather than later. So, that's this week's episode of Mingles with Jingles. Like I said, bad news. Not really an episode of Mingles with Jingles, just a sort of situation report on the shit show that is my life at the moment. This is one of the reasons why people keep saying, Jingles, are you going to do a house tour video? God, no. It's a horrible old house. It was just very, very cheap. and I'm beginning to understand why. Anyway, so yes, that's it for this week's very depressing episode of Mingles with Jingles. Hope you all had a good weekend, and as always, take care, stay safe, and I'll catch you next time.